sticking point, really. I think that is the only issue. If we're looking for issues, we tend to look for issues in almost everything here in TNT. I think that is my only issue with it. It's something that he should have announced as Prime Minister, not as political leader of the People's National War. Because all it does, it doesn't necessarily look more so as Prime Minister pushing for TNT as a nation, but more so the Prime Minister trying to solidify his legacy. And we know that the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, has been pushing hard for different factions that will be his legacy when he leaves office, whenever that may be. As I said, should have announced it more so as Prime Minister rather than political leader of the PNM, but it's not necessarily a big deal or a big issue. So we should not necessarily get too caught up in the politics of that. But that's latest coming from the Prime Minister. Interesting, though, that he's hinting at the removal of the Privy Council of our final Court of Appeal and moving to the Caribbean Court of Justice, bearing in mind Trinidad and Tobago fought very hard. Trinidad and Tobago fought to have the headquarters of the Caribbean Court of Justice established here in Port of Spain, Trinidad. Imagine that the CCG is right around the corner from Napa, not too far from the Parliament of TNT, and yet still we're not actually a part of it. No, we don't. We've had judges that have sat on the CCJ, but we actually do not go to the CCJ as our final court of appeal. So, you know, again, we've weighed the pros and cons. People have expressed a lack of confidence that there would be some sort of, we would lose impartiality if we went to the Caribbean Court of Justice. But impartiality is something that we would walk away from if we remain, if we actually went to the Caribbean Court of Justice. We need to remain at the CCJ, given that we still practice Commonwealth law. But ladies and gentlemen, let's be real. There's so many pros and there's so many cons. And as far as I'm concerned, I mean, I had to study this in university as part of one of my papers. I wrote, the pros moving towards the CCG outweigh the cons. We've had interviews and discussions like that on AM Prime previously. And you know, we're going to have that again, just to get you and your mind jogging once more as to the pros and cons. But interesting developments. We certainly look forward to hearing more of that in time to come. Now, there's one more thing I want to mention to you before we go to our first break this morning, and it is in respect to constitutional reform here in TNT. It's actually what my first guest, who will be joining me shortly, will be here to discuss. Now, the report of the National Advisory Committee on Constitutional Reform, bearing in mind it's a working document, it's not a draft constitution. So citizens need to realize that. It simply puts forward recommendations and 9 working points. It is in no way a draft constitution. So, ladies and gentlemen, please don't get it confused. Now, the report is quite remarkable. It's extensive. It's mixed with ideas. And I didn't want to say good and bad ideas because it's entirely up to the individual who has taken the liberty to read the executive summary to understand or interpret what those ideas are. So I might think it's good, you might think it's bad, could be the other way around as well, but it certainly will lead to public debate. Now, this document also speaks about TNT's development since independence, since we also gained republic status. But what needs to bear in mind with this document is that it's on the back of consultation meetings that the National Advisory Committee had across TNT. It started in April this year, but it was poorly attended. Many times you look if you had 25 people attending these meetings. And that's the thing. So the recommendations even, I think they received just over 800 written submissions from members of the public in respect to recommendations. And to me, in a nation of 1.3, 1.4 million people, that's quite poor. We only had so many interested citizens in constitutional reform. So it makes me wonder if people had an understanding, or people were educated enough to know what constitutional reform is, what it entails, and why it's important. It's either that or people just didn't care to participate. But essentially, this means the report reflects the views of a very, very tiny fraction of our population here in TNT. So that is why the contributions or the issues highlighted in the report do not necessarily reflect TNT as a whole. But again, that's where the advisory committee came into play and had to put forward submissions from committee members as well. Such committee members including Barry Sinanan, who is the chairman, and Dr. Terence Farrell as a committee member. So they actually identified 6 themes emerging from these consultations. They were, and I'm reading it for you now because I've got the list right here, please excuse me, a more democratic society, which is the focus of the conversation later on, expanded rights, proportional representation, greater accountability, less corruption, 4 and 5, more or less seem like the same thing, and a better public service. So, before productive discussions begin, and before we have decisions taking place, it is in my opinion that citizens actually need to be educated on these 6 topics, bearing in mind that there were 800 plus submissions, written submissions to the advisory committee, and the consultation meetings were poorly attended. At least that's based off of what I saw, and to my knowledge. The advisory committee may argue otherwise, but the public needs to be educated on these 6 areas before any sort of decisions can be made. It's imperative that we do that. And I wonder who's going to take the responsibility for doing that. Is the National Advisory Committee's work completed? Is the Prime Minister and the government through the Ministry of Communications in the Prime Minister's office going to take that responsibility? But whomever the rule leads to, it has to be done, in my opinion. So we as the media also have a responsibility, which is why in programs like this, we welcome guests to have such interviews. And in a bit, we are going to do so. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take a break here on AM Prime, and we will return shortly. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity, from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378, or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
We are tackling the hard-hitting topics, some controversial topics, some topics we sweep under the rug. You don't always have to forgive in a relationship for it to move forward.
If it is you are in a situation where you forgive the person, but to the detriment of yourself, what are you really doing?
It is very uncommon for somebody in the younger age group to have dementia.
Atheists don't not believe.
Is that I can't disprove God, but you also can't prove God. So we kind of at a stalemate.
We'll focus on the woman who's being the victim,
Right.
or the man who's being the victim. We exclude the children.
Folks are trying to study the underlying brain mechanism to figure out how does this particular disorder happen in the brain? How is the brain processing this?
Don't worry about AI. Worry about humans working with AI.
Are you willing to learn new skills to stay relevant for the future job market? That's the challenge that people are going to struggle with.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
This is Face of Sports, WESN Content Capital. How you felt about the kiss on the lips?
That's the business. I'm nothing to do with that.
I find that was distasteful.
The national senior team, whether you like it or not, that is the model for all other teams to follow.
I'm assuming that the regional requirement may be a much stricter requirement.
This is not about Pro League and Super League. This is a league run by the Normalization Committee that I'm responsible for.
Nobody expected FIFA to fund this arrangement.
If we don't get a professional attitude towards this, we are doomed for failure.
You break the balance, trip the leg, control the body.
They ain't gonna stand put forever.
Why you want the Chiefs to lose so? Why you want the Chiefs to lose so?
They already have two. Lamar
Why? You're jealous because you know the Chiefs getting closer to the Patriots. Let's go to the last part.
No.
Let's go to the last part.
You are watching Strictly Legal on WESN Content Capital. Just give an overview of what exactly is that split arrangement.
Nah, you don't need to register nothing. You don't need. We can do that another time. But then it becomes a hit, and then everybody starts to want to claim.
The laws that predate many of the independent countries' constitutions are going to be those colonial laws.
We know there are an infinite amount of circumstances that would lead to a murder.
I have a great idea and I have a great concept, but until it's actually expressed, it does not become intellectual property.
Accomplishments or targets of a forensic accountant is to quantify what may have been lost.
They believe we defend criminals and we manipulated the law and we exploiting the system.
A responsible journalist will reach out to the person who they have the information on for a comment.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
FanZone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movietown, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being with us this morning as we continue the conversations. As we're speaking about the report of the National Advisory Committee on Constitutional Reform, the report entitled We the People to Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley. Now, just to give you a brief recap, the 6 themes emerging from the consultations, they were identified as a more democratic society, expanded rights, proportional representation, greater accountability, less corruption, and a better public service. Now, in a democracy that is Trinidad and Tobago, what can be defined as a more democratic society, something that can be rather confusing. But a gentleman who is in a position to share his thoughts, his opinions, and ideas with us here on that, on exactly what a more democratic society is a former special advisor and coordinator of the National Tripartite Advisory Council, and that is Mr. Roy Mitchell. Good morning, sir. Welcome to the program. Good to have you on.
Good morning, Keaton, and good morning to your viewers. It's a pleasure to be on this morning.
Well, thank you very much, sir. Quoting directly from the report, it says there is a powerful demand for a more democratic society where citizens have more say and more control. Now, we often speak about how great our democracy is, with citizens having the ability to vote in an election, citizens having the ultimate say on the government as who's forming the next government, and even in respect to citizens participating in public affairs. So when the advisory committee wrote of the powerful demand for a more democratic society, exactly, in your opinion, what were they hinting at?
Well, I am not in a position to determine what they were hinting at. What I do know is that what they have said is totally correct. We need a more democratic society in Trinidad and Tobago. And incidentally, I want to commend the committee for a well-written and well-thought-out report and recommendations. When speaking about a democratic society, we all know that the most common among the means is the general election, and of course the local government election as well. We also have the people represented in the parliament, which is the seat of the democracy. We have the people represented on boards and committees and commissions and that sort of thing. But there's need for deeper representation by the people. And in that regard, I lament the fact that for example, the National Tripartite Advisory Council no longer exists. And it doesn't exist because, for want of trying, because attempts were made to bring it back on stream, even if it had to be brought back in a different configuration. But I'm afraid that the powers that be seem to not be interested in heading in that direction. But that particular body was representative of the people in a serious way, because you had the government represented, you had the business community represented, and you had the trade union movement represented. It would have been nice to have had civil society represented as well, but for the time being, that those are the three sectors of the government of the society, that were represented. That was a very, very instrumental component of the democratic system. In addition to which, I fear that even the consultations that we engage in, the people are not fully represented. Not everybody is in a position to prepare a paper or to stand up and make a presentation at a consultation or at a conference. There are so many other people who express themselves in different ways. They express themselves in calypso, in poetry, in drama, in all the various art forms, in art, in posters, in you name it, in music, in song, and given the opportunity to express themselves on the various components of any consultative agenda, I am sure they will come forward and express themselves in ways that are very creative and sometimes out of sync with what is accustomed to being expressed under normal conditions at a public meeting. So I'm simply citing instances where the different types of communication with the population could be enhanced so that the people will have a broader spectrum from which to draw in order to be part of the democratic process.
Mr. Mitchell, if we use that as one example, the National Advisory Council did have consultations, public consultations, I think 14 in total, that started April this year. but they were not very well attended. As I said, the council was very fortunate if they had 25 people in the room participating in such consultations. So that being said, is it that citizens do not see it as being productive to participate in such public meetings, or the level of public participation doesn't render them as being useful to members, to citizens of TNT?
Well, apart from the reservations that I've just cited, one has to take into account what the current environment is. As well-intentioned as the constitutional reform initiative is, it is not at this stage a priority in my humble view. It is not a priority of the population. The priority of the population right now is on the question of resolving the issues concerning crime and lawlessness. That is where the people's attention seems to be directed at this point in time. And people will participate to the extent that they have an interest, to the extent that they know it affects them immediately, to the extent that I think they believe that their safety and their protection and so on is involved. And as I say, as useful an exercise as constitutional reform is, well, in this particular instance, in my view, it just dropped out of the blue. I mean, there was no discussion, no concern, no agitation, no great demand for constitutional reform, to the best of my knowledge. And out of the blue, it was dropped on the people of Trinidad and Tobago. No justification of it was given. For example, the government is experiencing difficulty in functioning due to this part of the Constitution or that part of the Constitution. Nothing of the sort was even proffered to the population at large. So there was no background against which the whole question of constitutional reform was presented. A background that would have convinced the population that it was something more urgent than the crime situation that the country currently faces. So I'm not surprised that the attendance at the consultations was limited. As far as I understand from what the report said, of the number of consultations held nationally, only about 800 and something people attended. You had a number of experts who also were invited to give their views and opinions and so on. And you had a website, I think, too, that was put in place for people to respond to questions. They had again, a limited number of people who responded to questions and so on. So although in the report they indicated that they were satisfied, that they had a broad consensus from the population at large, I do not agree with that. I do not agree with that for the fact that, as I previously said, the people who are not disposed to communicating in that way were not given the opportunity to communicate in the way they know best, and to the extent also that that really, in my view, does not totally represent a larger cross-section of people who need to comment on the issue of constitutional reform. I have a feeling that if it was on the subject of crime and lawlessness, the numbers of people who would have participated would have been a lot more.
Well, if it's not representative of, please excuse me, a larger part of our population here in TNT, do the recommendations actually hold some level of water? Do you think that greater public participation would have probably led to stronger recommendations being made on the part of the Advisory Council? 816 total submissions from the public, which is incredibly low for our population total. Is that going to serve as a problem long term?
It's going to be a problem. I mean, I hate to belabor the point, but when a large chunk of the population is not given the opportunity to contribute in the way they know best, then you deprive yourself of a broader consensus with respect to what people expect of the Constitution. In addition to which, Ethan, it was done without any national purpose. I do not know that this country knows what our purpose is. What is the national purpose of Trinidad and Tobago? We are operating in a vacuum. So we put forward a constitution. We don't define the purpose of the constitution within the context of what the national purpose is. What is our national purpose? Yes, we have a constitution. Yes, we have a parliament. Yes, we have a cabinet. Yes, we have vision 20 this and 20 that. We have all these things. But can anyone point and say, look, this is the national purpose of Trinidad and Tobago in concise terms? No, we don't have that. So all of these things that we are doing, as well-intentioned as they are, and as well done as they are, they're serving a purpose that is not as great as we would have liked, because we are doing it in a vacuum. And we cannot continue to do that. That doesn't make sense.
So
I mean, we claim that we have a national identity. You know, we are easygoing, fit loving. You know, today we party, tomorrow we argue and we quarrel and we fight and that sort of thing. That's a kind of a national identity, but that identity is circumscribed by the fact that we don't have a purpose of which we are all working together to attain.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned, I think about twice, the fact that if such consultations focus more so on the ongoing crime and criminality issue in TNT, that we would have seen a greater sense of public participation. So is it, in your opinion, that consultations in respect to constitutional reform, or the entire conversation of constitutional reform, is ill-timed? What do you think should have been an alternative to what we saw during this exercise?
It's ill-timed, and it was ill-advised in respect of how the committee was constituted. I think I heard the Prime Minister say that he was disappointed, for example, that the opposition did not participate. But if the intention was for the opposition to participate, because in his view, his respectful view, and I agree with him, it is a non-political issue. It is an issue that affects all of Trinidad and Tobago. It is about the state of Trinidad and Tobago. Then the opposition should have been part and parcel of the advisory committee. Bring them in from the word go, so that they become part and parcel of every component, every step that is taken to achieve the objective. That is the kind of participation that I would expect to happen, a sort of bipartisan type of participation by the official opposition, so that they become part and parcel of what the outcome is, even if at some stages they may disagree with what the other side is saying, or the other parties are saying, or they may, you have a position now where you're not sure that the opposition is going to even endorse or agree or contribute to the passing of the legislation that is required, because to change the constitution, I think you require nothing less than what, a 2/3 majority, I think it is. And you know what the position of the opposition is. Not only that, you have the situation where you have an election coming up next year. What if the government changes hands and the opposition, not having had an opportunity to be part and parcel of this initiative, takes the position that if they gain the ascendancy in the elections and they become the government, they may just drop the whole thing, and there we go again. I mean, the country cannot continue along those lines. We have to find a way of bringing the opposition into the fold, using whatever diplomatic resources are at your disposal, in much the same way that you do so with overseas people with whom you have consultations and so on. Use your diplomatic resources to bring the opposition into the fold so that together you go forward in respect of any type of consultation or objective that requires the opposition's assistance and support in coming to a final conclusion.
I mean, I hear you, Mr. Mitchell, but just bear in mind one of the things is that the opposition leader during the swearing-in ceremony of her cabinet and her becoming prime minister in 2010, in her speech during that particular ceremony, she spoke of the need for constitutional reform. So it will be interesting to see how the opposition reacts to proposals on the part of the government, or even during the course of the next year. As you mentioned, it's an election year. So this is where I actually divert now to one of the recommendations in the working document of the advisory committee, and it spoke for the need for fixed election dates, as well as the prime minister being limited to a maximum of 2 consecutive 5-year terms with a cooling off period of 5 years before a former prime minister could be reconsidered for the reappointment to office as prime minister. That very interesting in itself. Fixed election dates is something we've spoken about for years now, for decades. But a maximum of 2 consecutive terms for prime minister with a cooling off period of 5 years. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a good idea. It's an excellent idea. You know, it helps with ensuring that, you know, your prime minister doesn't run stale eventually. It helps with ensuring that, you know, the one party doesn't monopolize the government, or one prime minister doesn't monopolize the governing of the country for a long period. In my humble view, there are some very solid recommendations, among which are the 2 that you have just mentioned. But what's the point of these solid recommendations if it's not going to go forward? The leader of the opposition has already shown signals that support is not going to be forthcoming. If support is not going to be forthcoming, then only those recommendations that will require a simple majority of the House can go forward. Other than that is another case of spinning top in mud. And I am saying that the responsibility rests upon the government to bring the opposition into the fold using whatever diplomatic means are available to them to do it. And they do have diplomatic means. They do have seasoned politicians among them. They know how to do these things. And I have seen it happen with Dr. Williams and Rujunat Capilio. I've seen it happen with Patrick Manning and Basio Pandey. You know, so it is not a case of it not ever having happened before. It has happened before. They've come together when the national good is what is at stake. And I'm saying that the government of the day has the responsibility to do whatever is necessary and required from a diplomatic standpoint to bring the opposition into the fold for the common good.
But Mr. Mitchell, when you argue that the politics of Eric Williams and Rujunat Capilio, the politics of Patrick Manning and Bastio Pandey are not the politics that you are seeing today. So even though you're speaking about the responsibility on the part of the government, do you think that the opposition would be willing in respect to extending that olive branch? We saw something to that effect in respect to crime talks and crime consultations, and the Prime Minister chose not to participate, and the opposition said because of that, we are not going to participate. They're loggerheads with each other.
Yeah, I know that. I am very, very conscious of that. But you know, I'm also very conscious of the fact that lately, the opposition has been toning down their obstructionism policy and supporting the government in a number of initiatives. Probably the timing might be right for another initiative to be taken to get them on board with this constitution reform. Because going forward, let's face it, going forward, it will continue to be an exercise in futility, unfortunately, unless you can find a way to get the opposition on board. The opposition has already indicated, look at the strong position that the opposition has taken in respect to the Privy Council. For God knows why. I mean, one really can't find a justifiable reason, any justification for us still hanging on to the Privy Council as our final appellate court. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. Yet, you have the opposition standing in the way of Trinidad and Tobago, being embarrassed by having the Caribbean Court of Justice reside in Trinidad and Tobago, and we are not making use of it. I mean, these things are things that could be ironed out, but the first step that has got to be taken is to set the tone, set the centerpiece of the thing right, and the centerpiece is getting a more amicable, a more congenial, a more consensual relationship between the government and the opposition. And
Mr.
let me tell you something.
In an election year, with 1 year left, and the incumbent People's National Movement-led government are having to now formulate a budget as well as their legislative agenda over the next year, do you think that they're going to see it fruitful in any way to try and work with the opposition with 1 year to go before an election is due?
They're going to have to. They have no choice. They have no choice. They know that they cannot pass the constitution reform recommendations without the opposition. So they have no choice. It isn't that it's either or. They have expended a lot of time and money and resources already, and they're going to expend a lot more time and resources and money again as we go forward. With the ultimate hope that the opposition will eventually come on board and they can pass whatever new constitution is put forward.
Sorry to interrupt.
So they have no choice.
This is you speaking with the expectation that the recommendations from the working document on the part of the committee is something the current government is actively going to pursue within the next year. That is your expectation.
Well, it is not my expectation. I think it is. I'm not saying that all the recommendations that are included in the report will be adopted by the government. Certainly not. There will be reservations with respect to certain aspects of it, and that's the reason why the consultation process continues. At the end of the day, the government will have to take a position. The UNC opposition will have to take a position. And the government position, I think, will be very straightforward. They will come forward with their recommendations as to what the changes should be in the constitution, or whether we should have a totally new constitution. The opposition, on the other hand, will come forward with whether they agree or not with the changes that the government would make. And even if they agree with the changes that the government will make, they will still have to take a position whether they want to go forward with it or not, taking into account the fact that they have an obstructionism policy that they have been operating for the past, 7 or 8 or 9 years? So these are issues that override the initiative, as I said, as useful as it is, as good a report and a set of recommendations that have been proffered by the committee, or albeit all not a priority at this stage, but nevertheless, the opposition has got to take a position, the government has got to take a position, and when the people decide who they want to govern them for the next 5 years, come 2025, those decisions will be taken into account in making that determination, whether we would want a UNC government or whether we want a PNM government to continue governing this country.
Mr. Mitchell, thank you for being with us. I'm going to ask you to stay with us just a bit longer, but we're going to take a quick break here on AM Prime, and when we return, we'll get into some other pieces of the working document put forward by the Advisory Council. So stay with us, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Roy Mitchell is discussing the Advisory Council's report, We the People, to the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley. We'll be right back after this.
Transform your home with PCU Plus. From stylish furniture to the latest appliances, we have everything you need to create your perfect space. At PCU Plus, we offer fair prices and affordable financing options that are cheaper than hire purchase agreements. With convenient locations in San Fernando, Tobago, Arima, and our lifestyle showroom in Barataria, you're never far from the best deals. Visit PCU Plus today and discover why we're the top choice for quality furniture and appliances. PCU Plus, quality you trust, prices you'll love. Visit one of our locations or find us online to start transforming your home today.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
Welcome back to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for being with us this morning. Mr. Roy Mitchell, a former special advisor and coordinator of the National Tripartite Advisory Council, joins us this morning on the program, speaking about the National Advisory Committee on Constitutional Reform, their report entitled We the People, to Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley. Thank you very much, Mr. Mitchell, for joining us. Before we went to the break, you spoke about the next election and the decisions of the citizens of TNT as to whom they would want to lead us over the course of the next 5 years. In fact, the working document spoke to some form, quoting directly now from the report, some form of proportional representation so people's votes at elections are not wasted. Now, you have spoken that the majority of the recommendations needed, or before it can be enacted, it needs the opposition's support in Parliament as well in order for it to be pushed through. Do you think that proportional representation is something that the government should focus on before the next general election?
Well, you know, proportional representation, the idea is nothing new. It came up with the Wooden report, came up with the Hayatali report, recommendations. Myriad number of citizens have been calling for it, political parties have been calling for it, and there's some rationale, some reasonable thinking that goes along with it. I mean, in other words, every vote should be counted for whatever it's worth. When you look at society as plural as we are, and divided along ethnic lines, you know, you have what, about 33 or 34% of the Afro-Trinidadians, about 35 or 36% of the Indo-Trinidadians. When you add that up, that's what, about 68%, 69%, and the balance are of mixed communities. Yet you have a situation where one party gets a number of votes that's less than the other party, but that party that gets a lower number of votes forms the government. There's something that is not right about that. And there's something that's not right about that. And although I know that the parties will be very stubborn in respect of their position on proportional representation, when you really examine it from this aspect of the fact that the country is divided into 3 tribes, if you want to call it that way, the Afro-Trinidadian, the Indo-Trinidadian, and the rest, there should be some measure of representation in the parliament that will cover the 3 tribes that reside in Trinidad and Tobago, that make up Trinidad and Tobago. And there is some justification for it. Whatever fears people may have with respect to how it will influence the outcome of an election, when all is said and done, the others, that's the 33 or so % that's not accounted for by virtue of the large number of ethnic groups that constitute that sector, they will be the balancing act. They will be the ones that will make the determination who will eventually take control of the parliament and the cabinet. So so you have that situation which irons out itself in that regard, and that's something that should be seriously considered.
It's interesting because it uses the language that some form of proportional representation be utilized, but at the same time, it's also proposing that the first past the post system be retained for election to the House of Representatives, but seats in the Senate be increased to 55. The president appoints 10 independent senators, 5 Tobago senators, and the remaining 40 seats. That is where proportional representation comes into play. So again, based on what you said in respect to, you have one party that is gaining its total votes is less than the other party, but it's still being elected to power. Does proportional representation seem counterproductive if it is only for the Senate rather than for the House of Representatives?
But the impression I got was that the proportional representation applied to the House, the lower house. If it did apply as well to the Senate, then a way has got to be found to make sure that same system of representation at the level of the Senate does take place. Although from my quick glance at the report, they were also saying that to be a member of the Senate, you had to satisfy certain basic minimum qualifications and experience, I think, in order to qualify at that level. In much the same way that they were saying in order to qualify to be the president of the country, you have to have certain basic minimum qualifications so to do. So I may be a bit hazy as far as that is concerned with respect to the Senate, but the fundamental to the entire question of proportional representation and the first past the post, could only take place at the level of the House of Representatives unless they accept the recommendation that the senators should also be chosen by the general population rather than by the parties who are represented in the lower house, and of course with the independent senators chosen by the president. So there's need to really massage that particular recommendation to ensure that there's consistency in what procedures and processes are used in order to ensure that representation at those levels, at the level of the Senate and at the level of the Parliament, lower house, follow the same kind of example.
Do you, when we spoke about one of the themes, it spoke about greater accountability and less corruption, and the report spoke of a stronger demand for a limit on the number of ministers, I think with a recommendation of a total of 18 members making up cabinet, and a number of ministries as well. Is it right to limit a government or even a prime minister to the number of ministries he sees fit to run a country, given that times and circumstances could change at any moment?
Yeah, I believe that the prime minister should have some flexibility insofar as that is concerned. The prime minister has to run the country. He has to be given as much flexibility as possible to do so. So placing limits on the number of ministries, to me, could be a little difficult to handle, given how the socioeconomic and cultural changes have taken place, the vicissitudes of life being what they are, the circumstances varying from second to second. A prime minister has got to be on top of things and therefore should have some flexibility. I could also, on the other hand, appreciate the fact that you can only appoint as many ministers, put it that way, we should only appoint as many ministers as are genuinely required. And it's not a question of jobs for the boys. And I fear that, I suspect rather that this is what they're trying to safeguard. They're trying to safeguard the interests of the population so that it doesn't become a question of jobs for the boys by virtue of appointment of ministers and junior ministers and parliamentary secretaries and that sort of thing. So there are the pros and cons which need to be weighed seriously and a determination made. But whatever the determination is, we have to cater for the fact that we expect that the people who are put in office will discharge their responsibilities in a way that is consistent with good governance.
So, Mr. Michel, when all is said and done, as we conclude this morning's conversation, how do we now make this meaningful constitutional reform? Given how you said that it is possibly ill-advised and ill-timed, how do we now make constitutional reform in 2024 meaningful to the people of Trinidad and Tobago?
The very first thing in my view, Ethan, is that this country needs to establish a national purpose. That national purpose is what will drive the spirit of the people. The people will know to what end they are all doing all that they're required and asked to do. So that's the very first thing. The second thing is that even at this stage, it is not too late to do whatever is required from a diplomatic standpoint to incorporate the opposition. The Prime Minister himself indicated that he's disappointed that they're not involved. It is for him as the leader. He is the leader of the country. It is for him to take the initiative to try to get them into the fold. If they agree, happy. If they don't agree, let it not be said that he did not take the initiative to get them into the fold. Because at the end of the day, the Constitution is designed to serve all of us, regardless of color, class, creed, race, or political persuasion. It's designed to serve all of us, but it must serve all of us within the context of a purpose to which we are all consensually heading in order to achieve the goals that we want to in Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, a national identity is quite important, and I'm glad that you raised that at the beginning and you're raising that now. It's a conversation of which we'll have to get into greater detail Mr. Mitchell. But I want to thank you for joining me on the program this morning. One of the things that we did not get into, which we will have to eventually, is the report focusing on our social, economic, and cultural progress since 1976. But for now, Mr. Mitchell, this is where we're going to have to pause on the conversation. Again, thank you very much for joining me on the program this morning.
It was a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, sir. It was a pleasure indeed. All the very best.
Okay, bye-bye.
A national identity, ladies and gentlemen, and if you speak to what is a national identity or national purpose, I would love to hear the responses of you, the citizens, and you, the viewing audience this morning in respect to TNT. But to get into another part of the consultations and the recommendations, and it's a conversation that we'll have to have over time. We can't squeeze it all into one program. But our social, political, and cultural development since 1976, that was one of the main sticking points to me from the report on the part of the advisory committee. Again, we'll get into these consultations over time. Ladies and gentlemen, we take a break here on AM Prime. We will return shortly. Stay with us.
The newest book is here, Closer to the Church, the debut novel by author and former mayor Louis Lee Singh. Available at all the Home Store branches, Barataria, West Mall, Shogunas, and C3 San Fernando. Paper-based bookshop 10 Nook Avenue, St. Anne's, WESN 30A Gattaca Street, Woodbrook, Metropolitan Bookshop, Ariapita Avenue, Woodbrook, and all RIK bookstores nationwide. Available online as paperback on Amazon.com and Kindle for e-readers. For more info, call 628-5835 or 389-6504. Also available from author Louis Lee Singh, I Used to Live in Heaven, Letters to My Granddaughters, and Local Government in Trinidad, Conspiracy Against the People.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, The Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378, or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
We are tackling the hard-hitting topics, some controversial topics, some topics we sweep under the rug. You don't always have to forgive in a relationship for it to move forward.
If it is you are in a situation where you forgive the person, but to the detriment of yourself, what are you really doing?
It is very uncommon for somebody in the younger age group to have dementia.
Atheists don't not believe.
Is that I can't disprove God, but you also can't prove God. So we kind of at a stalemate.
We'll focus on the woman who's being the victim,
right,
or the man who's being the victim. We exclude the children.
Folks are trying to study the underlying brain mechanism to figure out how does this particular disorder happen in the brain? How is the brain processing this?
Don't worry about AI. Worry about humans working with AI.
Are you willing to learn new skills to stay relevant for the future job market? That's the challenge that people are going to struggle with.
FanZone, your reliable, authentic supplier, has just gotten better. You can now visit our website www.fanzonett.com for your authentic wear and collectibles. The only place where you can use both your Visa debit and credit cards. Visit our website fanzonett.com to make your purchase today.
Welcome back to AM Prime, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. We are shifting gears, as you are aware. We like to have a diverse set of conversations on AM Prime. We are appreciative of all that is happening in TNT and certainly like to share with you that education and awareness, of course, is important. And in doing so, let me ask you a question. When you speak about or hear about inequality in TNT or bridging the socio-economic gaps that exist in TNT, what do you think of? You might think about education, the access to healthcare, or even when it comes to the access to technology and technological development. But there are some issues that remain invisible. And that is exactly what Feminine Caribbean, an NGO here in TNT, is seeking to bring visibility to issues that exist that are not spoken about for a number of reasons. And one of them is a societal stigma surrounding that. And this is one of the reasons why the Break the Stigma, Pass the Pad campaign was launched on August 12th this year, which coincides with actually International Youth Day. And in doing so, we've had the opportunity this morning to speak to one of the members, the program lead actually at ICNTT, Miss Ashley Burnett, and she joins us this morning on AM Prime. Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
As well, please tell us a bit more about Break the Stigma, Pass the Pad, this particular campaign that ICNTT is embarking upon.
Sure thing. So back in 2020, we would have launched the Safe Cycle program through our work at Feminine. And Safe Cycle has been a program that is seeking to achieve menstrual equity here in Trinidad and Tobago. And one of the things that we have seen throughout our work is the importance of ensuring that people have access to free period products, but also menstrual health education. And so a lot of our work featured working in schools where teachers would reach out to us to lead sessions with their students, both boys and girls, because it's very important that boys are also included in this conversation. And looking at that disparity in the access to period products, we saw that it was very necessary to have a campaign that focused on ensuring that school-age children can have access to free period products. And one of the things that we noticed was that young people are uncomfortable at times with talking about their period, even adults. And so one of the things that we saw was important was, in order for us to even end period poverty, for people to actually comfortably access period products, we need to break the stigma against menstruation. And when we talk about Pass the Pad, we're speaking about passing legislation, a Menstrual Equity Act that ensures that school-age children can access period products in public spaces.
Why do you think a societal stigma still exists? I mean, you spoke to the fact that there is a need to bring some level of education and awareness. You spoke about menstrual equity. Before I get into that, why do you think that this societal stigma still exists, where you're seeing the need to educate and bring awareness to boys and girls, even in the primary school level? Some parents might be hesitant and say, no way, I don't want my children being exposed to that. Why does this stigma still exist in 2024?
I mean, the fact that inequality still exists, speaks to the fact that we as a society, we have far to go. There are a lot of cultural norms and stereotypes that are embedded within our society, and we have not yet come to terms with grappling what that means and pulling back those layers to really unpack, the level of inequalities that affect us all. We see that there are various reasons that cause stigma, which is shaped by our just general discomfort about speaking about health and well-being when it pertains to things that kind of are packaged within reproductive justice and reproductive health. And we even see that with the lack of sex education in schools, and people are uncomfortable to speak about these things when we actually do need this kind of information. And so even when people will have access to these products, to ask for it is a different thing, because that means that people are going to know you're on your period, which, there's so much stigma around that. So I think it's just where we are at as a society, where we have not come to terms with these inequalities and this cultural taboo that we have against certain things that are related to sex. And that's really what it is.
You use this term menstrual equity. Could you please explain a bit more by what you mean?
Yeah, so menstrual equity is about justice. It's about ensuring that people can have a dignified menstruation. And it is looking at tackling period poverty at all levels. So we're looking at affordability for sure of period products, but also menstrual health education and looking at water and sanitation facilities. So being able to wash up after your period, being able to access tissue, running water, clean toilet. All of these things are what is packaged within menstrual equity. So it's looking at that from a justice perspective so people can actually enjoy these things. It's not a privilege, it's a human right. So that's what it is.
One of the things that came to my mind when you were just responding was period poverty. Is period poverty still a major issue? Less of a talking point, but still a major issue in TNT?
It is. And one of the things that we've seen, and there's been 2 studies, one led by Feminit and one led by another organization called Crown Hill. And the results of this study were quite similar. And it looked at, there are people who are experiencing period poverty. But of course, when we look at those who have access to being able to respond to a survey, for example, and who intersects with not being able to afford period products, we realize a large part of our population are being left behind when it comes to data collection. And so we would have done a survey, just about 500 people who would have responded. 100 people out of that survey said that they've had to miss school or work because they couldn't afford period products, right? And that's just people who were surveyed. And then you have almost half of the people who took that survey saying that they knew at least one person who couldn't afford period products. And so when you look at that snowballing and how many people, in fact, can't actually afford that, you realize it's a lot of people. We have 11 care banks. So these care banks are stacked with free period products in 11 communities across Trinidad and Tobago, 4 of which are in schools. We have 3 in secondary schools and 1 in a primary school in Tobago. And a lot of people are going to these places. We have one in the Family Planning Association in Port of Spain and in South Trinidad. And every day someone is asking individuals or other groups who are wanting more care banks set up. But of course, those are quite expensive. So there is a need, and we do see the impacts of period poverty, and we are seeing that there are several groups as well who have been even working longer than us. We know Helping Her just celebrated their 9th year anniversary. And they've been doing this for 9 years. And just to think that there are other people who have been, filling this gap from years before, it is saying something. There are new groups that we are seeing as well who are also tackling this issue. And the fact that there are so many NGOs who are seeing the need, it means that we do have a major gap when it comes to access to period products in Trinidad and Tobago.
So there is a major issue where here in TNT, a woman and girls cannot afford to purchase period products on a monthly basis. This is something that happens every single month, and they simply cannot afford to purchase these products. They're limited in terms of their access to these products. So, Feminit TT has embarked on this initiative, having these banks that are available to the public for women and girls to access. But what more could be done? What more needs to be done to bridge this this gap?
Yeah. So one of the things that we're calling for in this campaign is a Menstrual Equity Act. And this was something that we recommended back in 2020 when we launched our report. And a Menstrual Equity Act, it is a sustainable method because rather than having NGOs pull out of pocket, look for grants to be able to provide these menstrual products, it places a responsibility on the state to work with CSOs, civil society organizations, and other companies to provide free products to school children within their communities, within their schools. The ultimate goal for a Menstrual Equity Act is that in specific places where there is a need, that it is mandated that these spaces are providing period products, and that is something that will be funded through government assistance, and that's the ultimate goal. But for this campaign, we're focusing on children because, as you mentioned before in your intro, we are seeing inequalities in education. And we don't really look at how period poverty actually impacts your access to education. When you can't afford period products, you can't go to school, you can't go to work. If you're a teacher, who may have multiple children and you're still working on a salary that may not be able to cover all your needs, when you have to choose between food and a period and a pad, you're going to choose food because you need that to survive. And I know a lot of people who are also doing this work were impacted by period poverty themselves. I growing up in my community, I was impacted by period poverty because we couldn't just afford, and when you have to figure out and budget and, it's very, very costly.
What's interesting is that you've spoken about societal stigma, and you spoke about even cultural stigma to a certain extent. You've just spoken about structures within society as well. Is that because there's a lack of understanding of this issue, that people don't truly realize the burden that women face every month when it comes to this particular issue? And there is a breakdown in societal structures. You spoke about girls not being able to go to school, and equally women will not be able to go to work, so they may not be able to afford these products.
Yeah, there is a breakdown, and I think it's and we said it, you said it as well. The stigma that's attached to period poverty makes it a silent issue. Silent for those who aren't hearing about it, but quite loud for those who are impacted, because it's not something that people are typically thinking. They're like, a pad is like, let's say $40 for a pack. How can you not afford something that's $40, right? But that's the reality. We do have a society where there's a lot of inequalities when it comes to socioeconomic status. And we see the gap of folks who are living in low-income households is widening. So that means more people are being unable to afford basic necessities. And when we don't recognize that poor people are those that must be taken care of, if it's by a neighbor, if it's by the state, we have to ensure that no one is left behind. And unfortunately, that's what we're seeing. And that's why people are negatively impacted by period poverty. And the only way to fix that is if we have structural changes, is if we have the legislation to match it, and if we really work together as a society to change hearts and minds that can transform the way that we look at these things.
But you see, the thing is, it's also going to be difficult to get further public participation on such a topic, such an issue. It's one of the areas that's going to take a lot of work. I mean, ICNTT has started this conversation. Where does it need to extend to?
Yeah, we need to, and that's the thing. There's a lot of civil society organizations that are doing this work and engaging public education. I think we definitely need the allyship and support of everyone within society, those who are in corporate parts of Trinidad and Tobago. And I think a lot of corporate entities are seeing this need. We would have had Bmobile who would have donated $5,000 and the products to Feminine recently to stock the care banks. And so that level of corporate social responsibility is quite important. We also need policymakers, educators, those that have that power to see the need and to listen to what civil society organizations are saying, because this is something that folks have been calling for a long time, and we still are. So I think that is what we really need. We also need to ensure that within schools as well, that in whatever level that folks are learning about period poverty, because it is impacting them. And it is impacting their quality of learning, and we have to ensure that they can, be able to learn comfortably without having to be forced to stay at home.
Well, that's actually another point that we didn't necessarily speak extensively upon. The availability and access to period products on a monthly basis is one thing, but when you were speaking about period poverty and even menstruation equity in TNT, you mentioned something: access to sanitization facilities, the limited access to sanitization facilities that exist in TNT. Why does that still exist? We are aware that every month women and girls face this. I can't understand why this is something that is still an issue.
Yeah, it costs a lot of money to ensure that facilities are upkept. And we know, I can't speak to how budgets are, how it's disseminated, but it's so important that we ensure that these facilities are optimized to suit the needs of folks who are experiencing this. Having sanitary bins, having tissue in the toilets, having running water. And we know that there's a large water issue in Trinidad and Tobago where a lot of communities, they don't have water for days. And how are you meant to feel comfortable? Like, I can't stress enough how uncomfortable it is experiencing a period and there's no water, right? And one of the things that we've seen the call for is more sustainable period products, right? So we're asking people, you know, if you can't afford period products, here is an alternative. You can use a period cup, or you can use a reusable pad so you can wash those things. But how are you going to do that when you have no water, right? And so we have to ensure that these facilities within your home, within schools especially, they are equipped to handle this need. So you need running water, you need it to be clean, you need the sanitary bins, right? And that is something that's going to cost a lot that I don't think we have been able to explore properly.
Well, Ms. Burnett, please forgive me. I mean, it's not that I'm choosing to be ignorant, but you know, it didn't hit my mind when you said even the limited access to water. We have issues where houses and facilities don't experience water for weeks, sometimes months on end, and it's something that really it just went straight over my head. So it's that in itself is a huge issue here in TNT. It's only extending other issues as well. So as we come to the end of this conversation, and this is an ongoing campaign from Feminine TT, what more, how more could we be supportive of this, and what more can we do to bring about this level of awareness and education?
Yeah, I think we're actually poised in a really perfect time. We know that next year we have the general elections, and we have our members of parliament who are working within our communities. I think it's important that, you know, we attend these meetings and raise this issue as one of importance, and demand that, you know, when it comes to manifestos and really planning what's going to happen, that we have, you know, menstrual equity legislation, or at least a plan to ensure that people aren't left behind and we tackle period poverty head on. That we reach out to an NGO. There are so many, right, that, you know, you can access to volunteer, to donate. You can also reach us you can email us at feminine@gmail.com. And we ourselves can connect with other NGOs. You can volunteer with us to ensure that, you know, we really raise our voices and put ourselves to work to ensure that we end period poverty. And also tell a friend, just like I'm sure that there may have been things that you learned on this interview. And it's just important for us to all learn and constantly, right? I am also learning, and it's important that we kind of have that lifelong learning about these inequalities and tackle them head on.
Indeed. Well, Ms. Burnett, thank you very much for joining me on the program this morning. And of course, to all members of Feminist, thank you very much to them as well for their continued advocacy in trying to break the social stigma and of course in the fight to end period poverty here in TNT. Thank you very much for joining the program this morning.
Thank you so much.
All the very best. Take care. Ladies and gentlemen, I just would also like to mention that one international research journal last year published that in TNT it is estimated that a woman in her lifetime will spend an estimated $125,016 on sanitary products here in TNT. In fact, according to this particular journal, 99% of women in TNT said they believed that at least one menstrual product should be made freely available to the public. But this is, there was a joint select committee on human rights, equity, and diversity. And this GSC actually conducted a survey of 1,930 females in the public here in TNT. And in 2023, they found that 93.4% of respondents did not believe that these products were actually affordable. Similarly, the Safe Cycle report in 2021, this is what Mr. Burnett would have mentioned at the beginning of the interview. The Safe Cycle report on the part of Feminist Caribbean stated that 51.5% of respondents found that period products were not affordable. 39.9% found them sort of affordable, so to some extent they weren't affordable, and only 8.6% agreed that they were affordable. But as Ms. Burnett mentioned, this is approximately 500 people, and they were limited in terms of accessing a wider array of girls and women here in TNT. whether it be in some rural areas or less urbanized areas that may have indeed been part of the problem. But ladies and gentlemen, understand and recognize that it is a problem that needs to be addressed. There are NGOs that are doing their part, and of course there are corporate social organizations as well that are doing their part. So that's why we need to have these conversations. So many times when you think about, how can I assist people? How can I help people? I know oftentimes people think about doing charity, and charity is excellent. Charity is great. But these are one of the areas, if you're baffled and confused as to what more can you do or what more should you do, try donating to one of these banks that FeminiTT has established across. I keep saying FeminiTT is feminist, by the way, so forgive me for that. It's just in my mind. But to try and actually donate to one of these sanitary banks that Feminit has established across TNT. And let's aid in the fight to end period poverty. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for EM Prime this morning. Thank you very much for joining me. Thank you very much for my guests as we spoke about constitutional reform or the committee's report, We the People, to Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley. Mr. Roy Mitchell joined me for that conversation. And of course, we had Ms. Burnett from Feminit join me to speak about the Break the Stigma Past the Party campaign on the part of the organization. And Keaton Shaw, wishing you a safe day ahead, a productive one, a great one. And thank you very much to my dream team in Mr. Milewood. I was supposed to say Ryan Gomez, but he's sitting in that position this morning, Milewood, of course. And to Joash Alexander, formerly known as the Resident Rasta. Ladies and gentlemen, we wish you a good one, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
WESN.
Transform your home with PCU Plus. From stylish furniture to the latest appliances, we have everything you need to create your perfect space. At PCU Plus, we offer fair prices and affordable financing options that are cheaper than hire purchase agreements. With convenient locations in San Fernando, Tobago, Arima, and our lifestyle showroom in Barataria, you're never far from the best deals. Visit PCU Plus today and discover why we're the top choice for quality furniture and appliances. PCU Plus, quality you trust, prices you'll love. Visit one of our locations or find us online to start transforming your home today.
Folks, we're back and better than ever.
Your show have always appeared to be a show that is focused on going to the cause or looking to the cause.
We hardly ever talk about the white-collar crime, though. We always talk about the ones that involve more as physical violence against individuals.
The citizens will only measure transmission when water starts to flow through their taps.
The Constitution doesn't talk about local election.
Contract mafia that's responsible for looting the country, and they own and operate these politicians.
So if you are running a country and you can't say nothing as a prime minister, please take up your bag and go.
It is not comparative to the murder figures, but it is in fact very high.
I believe he's protecting certain individuals.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
Rabin and joins us from Tel Aviv. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us here on France 24. This isn't the first time Anthony Blinken has tried to arm twist Israeli officials into accepting a ceasefire deal since the first truce last November. If they haven't listened to him since then, why would they listen to him now?
Listen, really, we have to be very respectful for the efforts the Americans are deploying. Not only it's a nice visit of Secretary of State Blinken, but as you know, in all the meetings and negotiations that are taking place in Cairo or in Doha, you have the presence of the head of the CIA, who is there to monitor and to try to put the sides together. For the Americans, it's a very important issue. We're entering a very important, difficult election time. In 2.5 months, we are going to have election in the United States. And I know that Biden and Mrs. Harris don't want to get into this election by failing into bringing Israeli and Palestinians together. We have a lot of political pressure inside. Besides of that, nobody wants to witness this war to become a regional war. I think that the Iranian and the Sudan will have to be careful by their new president, Masoud Pezeshkian, who is trying to have a moderate reaction. And both sides, the Lebanese and the Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Iranian are saying when the war will end, the threat against Israel will end as well. So it's in the interest. It's very sad, you know. I have to.
But I want to interrupt you there, because if America wanted really to pressure Israel, there's a way to do it. Condition its aid.
I believe that we are going to use all their leverage and all their tool for the Israelis, the Palestinians, the Hamas to get to an agreement. I personally am optimistic. I think that, as Secretary Blinken said, we are at the end of the process. Either we will get to a deal in the next few hours, next few days, or it's going to be a catastrophe for the region, and nobody will be able anymore to bring back the hostage and to stop the war. So it's not in the interest of the Israeli to face the American in such way. As you saw, the Europeans are as well are putting over pressure. Last week, Minister Sejourné and his British homologue were there to tell that to all the players in the region. Everybody wants everybody to come down. The condition of the Palestinians are too, and I think that we can be overcome. Netanyahu changed the deal by adding to what President Biden put on the table in May. He added two things that the Palestinians cannot accept, the Egyptians cannot accept. One, it's the presence of Israel on the Philadelphia road, which is the border between Gaza and Egypt. And the second one, presence of Israel in some places in Gaza, which is not allowed the control of the Hamas in Gaza in the future. In both cases, the Hamas cannot accept it, and the Egyptians as well. The Philadelphia road, it's a very important road economically for the Egyptian and for the Palestinian. Most of the money, most of the Palestinian, the Hamas economy is coming from Egypt. Qatar is helping, the Iranians are helping, but most of it came from Egypt. That's the first. Second thing, the Hamas don't want any more presence of Israel, and we don't want Israeli to condition the future by the disappearance, political disappearance of the Hamas. Netanyahu has no choice. It's either the Hamas will go to control Gaza or either the Palestinian Authority. He has to make a choice. He knows that by making it, he may lose the power in a few months. But I want to believe that the interest of the state of Israel is more important for Netanyahu than small political games in Israel.
Offered, you sound very optimistic, but it's been so many months now, and Netanyahu seems to always manage to scuttle both sides, Hamas as well. I'm not saying they don't, but to scuttle the chances for peace. Because if you're Netanyahu today, would you want to secure a ceasefire knowing full well that Donald Trump could potentially win in November, and then he'll have more leverage to do what he wants to do, which is unclear, because what is total victory for Benjamin Netanyahu? Because Hamas still continues to fight, and we still have Israeli hostages who remain in Gaza.
I think nobody can wait until next January, 5-6 months from now, when the next president will come into office for the end of his conflict. and for the release of hostages. If someone will wait another 5 months, it will be no more hostages. It has to be clear. And Netanyahu understands very well that the international community and most of the Israeli are seeing in this war a main target, a main objective of this war is to bring back the hostages. If he will fail on that, it's over politically, and it will enter in the history. Then it was the biggest failure in the history of Israel by allowing the Hamas to kill 130 hostages who are presumably alive. The second thing, it's time for a political solution. It's no solution by war. Hamas cannot be destroyed militarily. Hamas is an ideology. Hamas is living out of distress, corruption, poorness, and ignorance. If we won't fight the real roots of the Hamas living, we won't be able to eradicate Hamas. And the only one who can eradicate the Hamas are the Palestinians themselves. The deal has to be that the Palestinian Authority, with the help of the world, Arab countries and the Western country and the United States, will go back to Gaza, will ensure security for Israel, and will take over Gaza, which will be the first step for a two-state solution that we are waiting for so long.
Exactly. I see that you're in Tel Aviv now. I see that you're in Tel Aviv now. In your discussions with people, are people happy with the way Netanyahu has handled this conflict, and do they want a ceasefire deal to be reached and eventually a two-state solution?
I'm not in Tel Aviv now. I'm back to Paris, but it doesn't matter. I'm speaking to Israeli all day long, on all levels, from all parties, from all places in Israel. The majority of the Israeli wants the hostages back, wants to know that the state of Israel, the army in Israel, is secure for them, and can they protect them when it's needed, which they were not able to do it in October 7th. So it's what the Israelis want to know. Then if something tomorrow will happen, the Israeli government and the Israeli army will do everything at any price to bring back hostages home. This is what is on stake politically in Israel, and Netanyahu has to understand that it's more important for his image, for the future of Israel, than some political games that will allow him to stay in power. And this is now the time for Netanyahu to make a decision that will involve his future. But the interest of Israel should be first in the priority of Netanyahu, as well as the interest of the Palestinians. We cannot allow this suffering anymore.
Yeah.
We cannot allow it. Peace is the only solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Military solution doesn't exist, and nobody is going to win this conflict. It's a lose-lose situation. If we won't have a political horizon to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, then it is too long.
Indeed. Ofer Bernstein, thank you very much for joining us with your analysis today.
Thank you.
In other news, Bangladesh's interim Prime Minister Muhammad Yunus gave his first major policy address on Sunday. The 84-year-old spoke in front of diplomats and UN representatives. He pledged his government won't tolerate disruptions to its vital garment industry. Yunus also reassured support for the country's immense Rohingya refugee population who fled from neighbouring Myanmar. Karis Garland reports.
Setting out his caretaker government's priorities in front of diplomats and UN representatives, Muhammad Yunus pledged continued support for the million-plus Rohingya refugees sheltering in Bangladesh.
We need sustained efforts of the international community for Rohingya humanitarian operations and their eventual repatriation to their homeland, Myanmar, with safety, dignity, and full rights.
Most of the country's Rohingya refugees fled neighbouring Myanmar in 2017 after a military crackdown in Rakhine State, which